And today we want to talk about language communities. We're going to cover a lot of ground, really talk about wide language communities, huge communication circles, and take it all the way down through the mid-sized language community and then down to the very specific close communication circle or small language community of our close friends and our family. And we'll talk about the maneuver between those and all that. But first, let's just talk about what a language community is. It's a big topic. Language community is exactly what it sounds like. It's a community that exists really because of the language that people in that community share. It's language that's understood by everyone in that community so that they can communicate. And as you know, we've discussed almost the theory or what language is in general. Remember when we talked about Lacan and Saussure. So we're kind of taking a step off point of that and coming into this. So let's talk about maybe some specific types of language communities, and that'll help us define it. Let's start with these large language communities. One way to look at them would be one like English. English is a rather large language community. What makes English a language community is the language, English. It's something that everyone who speaks the language shares, and they can use the same language to communicate no matter where they go. Somebody in France who speaks English, somebody in Japan who speaks English, somebody here in America, somebody in the UK. They all know standard English. And what makes that community, so successful is because of the shared experience of learning the language and the grammar rules of standard English. So you have this large language community. But then within English, you have some even smaller language communities. Let's talk about the difference between English and American English, if you will. Well, think about just some of the words that are used to describe things that are different. Still within the large English language community, we have words like lift in England, which we would think, immediately as a verb. You lift something up, but in England, it's an elevator. Flat, they call a flat an apartment. We call an apartment an apartment. The ground floor and the first floor are a little different over there. And there's a lot of things that would be confused if you were to use English around an American if they did not know the definitions of these words. And the definitions of these words and how terms are used in England come from the shared and common experiences that people grew up learning those words. So people in England who grew up learning those and have the shared experience of calling a lift would understand it. Whereas here, we would grow up calling it an elevator, we wouldn't understand it. We could take this even smaller with English itself, staying on that track. Let's think maybe in America, maybe some regional groups, some geographical locations that would be smaller language communities. Still pretty big though. I mean, we're talking, millions of people. So let's think maybe the North versus the South. We all know people who come from the North. Some of you might come from the North. We all know people who come from the South. Think about some of the vast differences. We don't even have to go into too many that they just start popping in your head. Not necessarily just, accent, but words that literally mean different things. Some people, the first time they ever heard the word y'all, they're like, what are you talking about with you all? So, there's words like that, but again, the shared experience of somebody from the South saying y'all all their life and hearing it, they know exactly what you mean. Somebody from up north who has never really heard that term, it would, they would be confused. What does that mean? Some people call a drink a soda, some people call it a pop, some people call it a Coke. Again, just the shared experiences. And in going along those geographical levels, think about going down even further and further. You got maybe certain even regions in a state. Even from one high school to a next, you could think of some of the shared experiences that maybe one football team or the whole school had at a game. Shared experience where language was created. Maybe some guy made a touchdown and they said, go Bill, go Bill. And go Bill has a significant meaning. They take it somewhere, everybody in that school says go Bill. It refers back to that game. Everybody understands it means yay or whatever, significant meaning that they put upon that. Okay, so they're large language communities. Now let's take a step down to medium-sized or mid-sized language communities. These wouldn't necessarily be, or they can be millions, but again, they're smaller than the huge English. Sometimes these are called career or hobby language communities because of the size and the specificity of the shared experience which make them. These would be things like people who work on cars. There would be a specific language that everyone, a shared experience, everybody who works on cars understands specific language. People who write or play music. People who work on computers. For example, you say a gig to someone who works on computers, what do you think? Exactly, you think memory. You say a gig to somebody who, plays music, they think they have a job. And that language has even been assimilated into other language communities. I've heard even, some of my colleagues at other schools say, I've got a gig here, or I've got a gig there. So that's been assimilated. You say a bar, to a, just somebody who, in general, who is speaking English, they might think of a place where you go and drink, have dinner, watch a band. But if you say bar to somebody who plays music, they think, they know it means a measure. So if you think about like, a burn, to burn a CD, if you didn't understand what burn a CD meant, somebody might really think that you were burning it. The shared experience of hearing that for a long time makes that tight, mid-sized language community. Music can create some of these. If you like country music, rock music, rap music, R&B, the shared community of the television stations that go along with those, the websites and things, you have very close, those communities. Some of these communities are formed even smaller now in some of the social networking circuits that we have out there, like MySpace, Facebook, YouTube. You have communities that are still mid-sized because lots of people share the experience, which creates the language. But again, they're not what we're going to talk about in just a moment, the small, tight-knit language communities of 3 to 4, maybe 5 people at the most. So these mid-sized language communities come from more shared experience than just learning like the broad language of English. So let's move down another step. Let's take the very small, close communication circle. What makes something what we're going to define as a close, small, tight communication circle? Well, how we're going to define it for the purpose of our papers and our ad paper that we'll talk about next time is, it has to be at least 2 people. And it's not really going to be more than 3, 4, 5 at the most. And if it gets up to be, more than that, you probably got 2 close communication circles that are connected by maybe a larger one. Let me give you an example. Family, people you live with. Very close friends that you live with or talk to every day. The key with these close communication circles, these are people that you have to speak with, communicate with language every day. Just about every day. So they can be online if you have a best friend that you talk with online all the time, because all of that shared experience creates language. Think about some of the little, little sayings that you and your family or you and your best friend have that, if somebody else heard that little saying outside of that language community, they would have no clue what you're talking about. I mean, think for a second. What are some of the little sayings or words that you have that you and your family or you and your close group of friends have from a shared experience? It might be you went to a movie sometime and you saw somebody, do something funny, so somebody said something like giggle or whatever, and now that term has a connotation that everybody in that language community who shared that experience can carry on to the next experience when you say it. So, for instance, you're at McDonald's or somewhere else eating one day and somebody does something and you say giggle or whatever the word was. Not only does it mean what it means in that situation, but the context of the other situation is put on top of it. Everybody who has that shared experience, everybody in that language community can completely understand. Somebody outside looking in goes, giggle. What are they talking about? Giggle is a laugh or whatever, and it might not have anything really to do with a laugh. So what I want you to do is really think about some of these little, we can call them code words. Some slang might be a way to look at it, but these are very close communication circles. Now, we have the really large ones, we have the mediums, and we have these small ones. Within these small ones, there's going to be one language that's probably going to be more what we'll refer to as maybe your base language. This will be the language that you probably think in inside of your head. When you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, that's the language that's being spoken inside of your head. And we're constantly translating that language into our head into the appropriate language community for which we're communicating at the time. You might be, for instance, walking around your friends and you walk by and you stub your toe. Well, an expletive might come to your mind, and if you're around your friends and you decode the situation, that expletive might come out of your mouth because it's completely appropriate and everyone in that language community will understand what you meant. However, if you were around some people who you didn't know at a formal place like a church or a dinner, you might hit your toe and that same expletive, which might be in your base language, might come into your mind, might come into your head, but you look around the language community that you're in, it's not appropriate, it would mean something different. Somebody might think that you purposely were trying to be disrespectful, so you would translate that language in your head to fit the language community that is appropriate for the time. And that's what we do all the time. We translate the language to fit in the situation that we're in at that particular time. But how do we do it? I mean, this is something that we're so good at because we've been doing it since birth. How do we maneuver from one language community to another? Well, really, it's kind of different for everyone. I mean, we notice the situation that we're in, we know the language community, and we translate. For some people, these could be sensory cues. I had a student one time talk about working at a pizza place, and his friend might have been taking him, and he's talking to his friend in that close communication circle while they're on the way. He walks in the door and he smells that pizza, and all of a sudden something clicked. He said, that was the trigger that allowed him to speak in the language that he spoke